You're all very welcome. My name is Orla, and I am the artistic director of the Moth and Butterfly Festival of Storytelling and Improvisation. And we are here today over in Morocco at the World Storytelling Cafe. So we're very excited to bring you stories for children for a whole maybe longer than a half an hour. We'll see how long we go today. So we hope you'll stay with us for the whole time. And as people are coming in, I'm just going to let you know, maybe you want to turn your cameras off because we are recording this, and then we can turn our cameras on at the very end if we want as well. We have a whole festival of storytelling for children and for grown-ups this whole weekend, and we started last night and we had folk tales told by people all over the world. It was very exciting, and some of you were there. I see some of the grown-ups who were there, and you're very welcome back today. And these stories today are for everyone, but particularly they are for children. So thank you, children, for coming, because these are especially for you. I'm going to tell a story a little bit later, and I'm going to tell the grown-ups about the festival. If you want to check out the festival, you can go to worldstorytellingcafe.com for the World Storytelling Cafe, or you can go to Moth and Butterfly Stories for our festival that's happening this weekend. The World Storytelling Cafe is there all the time, and they have great stories, and they're also on YouTube as well. And John will maybe talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have a whole weekend of festivals, so the rest of the weekend is for grown-ups, so check it out. The events are donation based now for the rest of the weekend. So if you'd like to donate, you can click the little donate button in World Storytelling Cafe, or I will put the little link up for us in the chat. But all events are open to everyone, so thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to invite my lovely friend, John Rowe, up to the stage to chat with me for a second. John, do you want to tell us a bit more about World Storytelling Cafe, and would you like to tell a story to start us
Well,
off?
I'll tell a story, but first of all, the I've I realised that we'd been running for nearly a year. March the 23rd, we'd been running for a whole year. And during the
Wow.
first lockdown, we were putting on 14 shows a week. Um, and But it's developed. The whole thing started because I'm not going to spend too long because this is a children's thing, and you don't want a history lesson. It's Saturday, it's not a school day, but we
No.
we were going to have a live, and we're still going to have a live story centre in Morocco, which was the inspiration of Lucy Wood, um, and uh, and then when the pandemic hit, we thought, well, we can put it online, and they asked if I would curate it, and I thought, well, I'm doing nothing else. Why wouldn't I? And it has taken over my life, thank goodness. And I've met people from all over the world, and it means that I can come to Ireland today by Ollie's Magic Carpet. And I'll land in Galway and maybe tell a story. Should I tell a story?
John, I would love it if you would tell a story. I will be listening because I love your stories. So,
Well, I think I
well,
think I'm going to China for this story.
brilliant, brilliant.
And it's from way back in time when my hair was dark and my beard was ginger and all my teeth were my own. And there was a girl, she was about the size of some of the people I saw up on the screen before you blanked out your screens. And she lived in a village in the middle of a forest in the middle of China. And she made the most beautiful ribbons you've ever seen in all of your life. And everyone from that village sewed those ribbons onto their clothes. And you know what it's like when you've got new clothes? You love to show them off. And they'd walk around the village in their fine clothes. But they all had ribbons. And they all had fine clothes. And there was no one to show them off to. So they walked through the forest. And they came to a city. And everyone admired them. But in the middle of the city was a palace. I know there's some of you that are sitting in forts, and it's like a fort, but just with big sort of this beautiful building inside. In fact, if we were in Marrakesh, it would look like the palace would look like a fort. The walls would look like a fort on the outside. This is in China. And in the middle of the palace was an emperor, like a king. And he looked out of his window. And he said to himself, why have those people up there got better clothes than me? Servants, go and find out where they got them from. And the servants went out and found out all about the Ribbon Maiden. Well, don't just stand there, said the emperor. Go and fetch her. Well, off went the servants, through the palace, through the city, through the forest, till they came to the village. And there was the Ribbon Maiden, making the most beautiful ribbons you've ever seen in all of your life. You go. The emperor wants to see you. Well, I don't particularly want to see the emperor, said the Ribbon Maiden. And she just carried on sewing. Well, you can't turn down invitations from the emperor. Well, they took her and they put her on a cart and they dragged her through the forest and they dragged her through the city and they dragged her through the palace and they threw her down at the emperor's feet. You go. You will make me the finest ribbons you've ever made in all of your life. Pardon, she said. You think you can send your servants to my village? Insist I come and see you. And when I refuse, I'm put on a cart, I'm dragged through the forest, I'm dragged through the city, I'm dragged through the palace, I'm thrown down your feet. And you say, you go, you will make me the finest ribbons you've ever made in all of your life. You must be joking. Now, you can't talk to emperors like that. Well, he took her and he locked her in a room. You go. You've got 7 days to sew me a live chicken. And if you can't sew me a live chicken in 7 days, it's off with your head. Well, she was worried, but you can understand that. So she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed. And after 7 days, there was the most beautiful embroidered chicken. But it was still an embroidered chicken, it wasn't alive. She thought, how difficult it would be to hold up her head without a body underneath it. And she cried, and a tear dropped on the chicken, and she bit her thumb. Bit it really hard, and it started bleeding. And a drop of blood dropped on the chicken. Suddenly, there was a live chicken in the room. In walked the emperor. There you go, sir. Live chicken. There's a live chicken. Chicken was there, clacking away, running round the room. You didn't sew that, said the emperor. Someone brought that in for you with that. The chicken jumped up, pecked him in the face, and jumped out the window. Right. 7 days to sew me alive. let's have something, something a bit more complicated. A peacock. You know, I want that big fan tail. I want an eye on the end of every feather. If not, you know exactly what happens. Off with your head. Well, she started sewing, and she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed, and after 7 days, there was the most beautiful embroidered peacock, but it was still an embroidered peacock. It wasn't alive. And she thought how lonely her body would be without a head on top of it. And she cried, and a tear dropped on the peacock, and she bit her thumb, and a drop of blood dropped on the peacock. Suddenly, there was a live peacock in the room. In walked the emperor. There you go, sir. Thy peacock. There was the peacock strutting round the room, doing all those peacock things, fanning its tail. The emperor looked at her and said, "You didn't sew that. Someone brought that in for you." With that, the peacock jumped up, pecked him in the face, and flopped out the window. If you ever see a peacock trying to fly, they flop. "No more tricks," said the emperor. 7 days to sew me alive. What should we have? No, not hippopotamus. No, not a giraffe. Not even a dinosaur. I know. A live dragon. Little wings, no skimping, all those little scales, little pointed tail. And if you can't sew me a live dragon in 7 days, it's off with your head. Well, she was even more worried, but she thought she'd try, so she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed, and she sewed, and after 7 days, there was the most beautiful embroidered dragon. You know, like the ones you get in the back of silk dressing gowns, only even better. But it was still an embroidered dragon. It wasn't alive, and she thought about her head rolling across the floor. Ba-doing, ba-doing, ba-doing. She cried. And a tear dropped on the dragon. And she bit her thumb. And a drop of blood dropped on the dragon. Suddenly, there was a live dragon in the room. In walked the emperor. And before he had a chance to speak, the dragon breathed in, and the dragon breathed out. And we all know what happens when dragons breathe out. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Fire. And there was just a little pile of ashes where the emperor used to be. "Right, where do you want to go?" said the dragon to the girl. "Where would you like to go if you were that little girl?" "Oh, you want to go home?" "Yeah, back to me village." "On me back," said the dragon, and they flew out through the window, once round the palace, twice round the palace. The dragon breathed in, and the dragon breathed out, and there was just a little pile of ashes where the palace used to be. They flew across the sky. The ribbon maiden was so happy. She was making the most beautiful ribbons of all different colours and throwing them into the air. And if you look up to the sky till this very day, if you're very lucky, you'll see a rainbow, and you'll know that's where the Ribbon Maiden was making her way home on the back of the dragon. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that story.
Everyone can click their reaction buttons if they want. You can give John a big wave or a big clap. Thank you, John. That was amazing. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed that story. I know people are messaging me; they're having a great time listening. So that was great. That was great, John. I love dragons. I love dragons. It's one of my favorite things. Um, I'm just going to say hello to people who just came in now. And if you want to leave your camera off, we are recording and we can turn them on at the end if you like. And you just can say hello. But if you want to say hello in the chat and maybe tell us where you're listening from. And Abigail loves dragons. Hi, Abigail. Hi, Abigail, listening in Wicklow in Dublin, I think. So hope you're having a lovely time today. And I know Tracy is listening as well, and they've a fort built. So John was talking about forts, so that's brilliant. And there's people in Woking, Elise and Maxwell in Woking. Hello. Thanks for tuning in today. People are listening from all over the world, which is so cool. So cool. I'm in Galway in the west of Ireland. John is over in the UK, and John is brilliant. John goes around festivals in big tents and tells stories to loads of kids. In regular times, he tells stories in real life on the ground. So today we're lucky to have him on the computer telling to you, and he can come right into your sitting room and even into your fort and tell stories. So I would like to welcome my next storyteller now, because we have another storyteller here today, and that's Hannah Brailsford, who tells lovely stories. I'm really delighted Hannah is here. Hannah, will you pop up and have a chat? I can see Hannah's face. Can you hear me, Hannah?
I can, but I think you have to start my video.
Okay, we'll ask the tech fairies to start Hannah's video.
Oh,
Tech
there we
fairies, can you?
go.
Right.
Hello, hello.
Brilliant. Hello. Welcome. And have you a story for us?
I do have a story for you. Now, listening to John's story, I was thinking, oh, what story shall we have? But I think I'm going to tell you one of my favourite stories. And like John's story, it starts a long, long, long time ago. Not in my time, not even in your time, but in a very, very special time, a time called dream time. Now, in dream time, all of the animals could talk. And not only could they talk, but they lived together in perfect harmony, in peace and happiness. So if you were there in dream time, you would see the tiger having tea with the rabbit. Or you might see the crocodile having a nice piece of cake with the monkey. It was just a wonderful, lovely place to be. And everybody shared everything. And if anybody was ever in trouble, there would always be somebody there to help. But one day, very early in the morning, before the sun had even come up, a new creature arrived in dream time. A creature that no other animal had ever met before. It came from a long, long way away, and it had travelled far. And so when it arrived with a thump in dream time, it was thirsty from its journey. And this creature was huge, and it was green, and it was a little bit slimy. And it looked around for something to drink. Now, luckily for the creature, it had arrived right by an enormous lake, surrounded by beautiful trees. And it looked at the lake and it thought, that'll do me. And it reached into its pocket, and it took out from its pocket a magic straw. A straw that could be as long as it needed to be. And it took the straw and it made the straw very long indeed. And then it put the straw down on the ground until it reached to the lake, and then it began to drink. Popped the straw back in its pocket. And where that beautiful lake had been, there was now just a great big muddy crater. The creature had drunk all of the water. The whole of the lake was in its belly. And when it moved, its belly went. Now, all the time it had been drinking, the sun had been coming up. And that day it was a very warm day indeed. And so the sun, even early in the morning, was shining really brightly. And although the creature had drunk a whole lake, it was still thirsty. And so it knew it needed to find some more water. But where? Where could it find water? So it put its great big face up and took a sniff to see if it could smell out the water. And sure enough, it could. There was a faint whiff of something, weedy and, yes, it was a river. And so, following its nose, that great big creature, that huge green creature, which was now no longer huge, but enormous because it had all of the lake in it, began to hop towards the river that it could smell. Until it came to the river. And once again, and I invite you to join me with this bit, it went into its magic pocket and it took out its magic straw and it made that straw really long, and it laid it down by the riverbank and it began to drink. Back in its pocket. Where the river had once been, it was now just a long, muddy snake with not a drop of water left. For now, that huge, enormous creature had not only a lake, but a whole river inside its belly. And it went. But still the sun was rising, getting hotter and hotter as it was approaching midday, and the creature was still thirsty. He needed more to drink. But he couldn't hop anymore because he had so much water inside him. Instead, he needed to waddle. He needed to waddle and find water, but he needed a really big drink because he was really hot. And he had to think to himself, where am I going to get a really big drink? Then he put his face up to the sky and he took in a big. And sure enough, he caught a whiff of something, something salty. Oh yes, and he could almost feel the salt on his great big mouth. Of course, the sea. And so, following the scent and the smell of the sea and that tang of salt, he made his way, wobbling. Until he finally came to the beautiful sea, its rolling waves crashing on the shore. "That will do me nicely," said the creature. And he took out his magic straw to make it really long because the sea was very large. And he put it down on the sand, and then he began to drink. He had drunk the whole of the sea now. Instead of those beautiful crashing, rolling waves, there was just sand as far as the eye could see. And that creature, Tiddalack, for Tiddalack was his name, he was now full of a lake, a river and a sea, and he was so full that the water came right up to his mouth, and he shut his mouth tight because he didn't want to lose a single drop of that water, as now the midday sun beat down on his head, and it was very hot indeed. Now, there was one little bit of water left, a little rock pool that Tiddalack hadn't seen. And in that rock pool there was a little fish, and he had watched what had gone on, and he was very upset indeed. And he poked his head above the little bit of water left in his pool and said, "Excuse me, can you please give back the sea? All of my friends and family are in there. You can't just go around drinking the sea. We all need the sea. And besides, this little bit of water won't last long on this sunny day. And what will I do when there's no water? Please give it back." But Tiddalack, he didn't want to give the water back, and he just shook his head. So the little fish didn't know what to do, so he called up to the sky. He called for all the birds in Dreamtime to go and find all the animals and tell them what had happened. And so the seagulls and the owls and the raven and the robin, every animal, every bird you can think of, went and flew to find the other animals to tell them what had happened. And of course, the animals, when they heard that the sea had gone, well, they rushed first of all to the giant lake to see if there would be water there, but of course there was no water. And then when they went to the river and saw that that was dry too, they knew that the news from the birds must be true. And by the time they got to the beach, well, you can imagine how worried they were. Now, Lion being Lion, he took control and he said, "I've got an idea. We need to get this creature to give us back the water. You creature. Now, you're new here, and you probably don't know, but we share everything in Dreamtime. And you see, you've gone and taken all the water from the lake, the river, the sea, and it just won't do, chap. It won't do, old chap. Just give it back, and you can share it with us. Come on now." But Tiddalack just shook his head. He wasn't giving that water back. And so Lion, who being very polite indeed, he turned to the other animals. He said, "He's not going to give the water back. We're going to have to take action here. I tell you what we're going to do. All animals that can roar, we're going to roar the water out of this creature. That's what we're going to do. We've tried nice things, and now we're going to roar at him. It'll shock him, and the water will come flushing out." So that's what they did. They roared. You can roar too if you like. They roared at Tiddalack. And whilst they're roaring, wobbled Tiddalack, he still didn't open his mouth. "It's no good. Somebody else is going to have to come up with an idea. I'm all out of ideas." Well, the animals had a little think, and then Tiger said, Why don't I just, with my great big claws, poke him and burst him? That would be good. But Lion said, no, 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 we are a peaceful community. We don't want to hurt the creature. We just want to persuade him to give the water back. It's an idea, Tiger, but let's leave that unless it's very necessary. And that's when Elephant stepped forward and said, no, I've got an idea. I think maybe I've got large feet. We could stomp and wobble the water out of him. Good idea, much more peaceful. Let's try that. So that's what they did. All of the animals, large and small, with hooves or with claws, they all began to stamp upon the ground on that beach to try and wobble the water out. But as much as Tiddalak shook, he still didn't open his mouth. Well, they were really running out of ideas now. Kangaroo suggested bouncing, and so they tried that, but because his belly was so big, everybody just flew in all directions like a giant trampoline off Tiddalak's belly. They were worried they were going to have to take Tiger's suggestion up, and they really didn't want to do that, when suddenly they heard a little voice. Excuse me, I have an idea. There on the sand was a little sand snake. I think I had a very long tongue and a very long tail, and I could tickle him. I can summon all the sand snakes and they can tickle, tickle, tickle. And I bet he'll open his mouth. Now Tiddalak was sitting there, having been shook and bounced and roared at, and he was just beginning to close his eyes, quite exhausted. So he didn't even see the little sand snakes wriggle up onto his belly. But he soon felt them. And I invite you with your fingers, just like the tongues and the tails of the sand snakes, they began to tickle and tickle and tickle and tickle. Perhaps you've got somebody next to you who can tickle and tickle and tickle and tickle until Tiddalak, he started to wobble. He started to shake. And it was getting too much. It was getting too much. He couldn't hold it anymore. And finally, he opened his mouth, and with a huge rush of water, the sea came tumbling out and filled the shore once more. And from the sea, the river was filled, and finally, even the lake. Well, of course, the animals were delighted. Sand Snake and his family, they were heroes. And they looked around for the creature that had had all the water. But that huge creature that had sat on that sand was no longer huge. For you see, when the water came rushing out, he shrank until he was just a shriveled, green, rather slimy creature. And Lion went over to him and looked down and said, now, who are you? And Tiddalak looked up and said, I'm Frog, and I'm very sorry that I took your water. It's just I was so thirsty. I promise, if you promise never to tickle me again, I will not drink all of the water. How do we know? Said Lion. I'll show you. And out of his magic pocket, Tiddalak the Frog took his straw and he broke it in two. And then he sealed up his magic pocket with some of his slimy goo. And the animals were satisfied. And so from that day on, they welcomed Frog into their community of animals. And he never did take too much water. And to this day, Frog is still small and green and a little bit slimy. And if you have a frog in your hand and you look very carefully, you might just see where his magic pocket used to be. But take it from me, whatever you do, if you have a frog in your hand, don't tickle him, because he won't be very happy. And that is the tale of Tidlac, the very thirsty frog.
Yay! Oh, Hannah, I loved your lion voices and all your voices. I was really standing right there with you. I think everybody was. They were brilliant. Thanks for that lovely story. Thanks so much. Um, we might have another story in a minute from Hannah and John. We might have another little shorter story. I'm going to just welcome a couple of people came in. And welcome to Butterfly's first festival of storytelling and improvisation, hosted in conjunction with the wonderful World Storytelling Cafe. So today we're in Galway in the west of Ireland, and we're in Marrakesh in Morocco, and you're all over the world. If you want to put in the chat where you're listening from, that'd be brilliant. And we're recording this, so I'm just asking people to leave their cameras off. And if you want to put them on at the end and put your mics on at the end, we can do that as well if you want. And my name is Orla. And I'm going to tell you a story because I know there's some Irish people listening today. I can see some Irish people there. Oh, yeah, loads of them. I'm going to tell you a story from Ireland. And this story is from the west of Ireland. And this story is from Galway in the west of Ireland. But in Galway, there's a place called French Fort. And if anyone knows French Fort, put your hand up. Okay, so Galway, French Fort in the west of Ireland. And if you walk down a little boreen, that's the word we have for a little road, you will find a place with very tall hedges. And in those hedges, the birds sing. And they sing very loudly, very beautifully. And if you get to the very end of this little boreen, there's a well hidden behind some bushes. Now, the local people in Frenchfort will talk a lot about this well, and the one thing they say is that this well was not built by human hands. You see, many years ago, very close to the well, there lived two giants. Two giants. Now, their names have long been forgotten, or maybe it's that people weren't allowed to say their names because giants are very magical and people are still a little bit scared of them. So for this story, I'm going to call them Big She and Big He. Well, Big He and Big She grew up very close to each other. Now, this was both fortunate and unusual because there weren't that many giants around this area. But the two of them grew up very close down the road from each other. And as they got older, Big He fell in love with Big She, and Big She fell in love with Big He. And the day came, and Big He asked Big She to marry him. And she said yes, and Big He put a big golden ring on Big She's big finger. And they were so happy. She was delighted with her big husband. And they moved into a big little cottage with big little sheds, and they had crops and animals, and they were so happy. Now, Big He and Big She were both giants, as I've said to you, and giants love helping people. I don't know why people are so afraid of them. They are really good at things like clearing a field full of rocks because they have big hands, and they're really good at reaching up and fixing tiles on a roof because they have long legs, and they're really good at defending villages from enemies because they are really strong. Well, the day came when Big He got a call from another giant far across the other side of the land, and he asked him to come and help him to defeat their enemies. So of course he set off on a long, long journey. But somebody had to stay behind and feed the animals and mind the crops and do all the big little things around the house. So Big She said she would stay at home. Now across the land a great battle was fought, and the battle was won. But that's another story. And Big He decided he would make his way home. It was a long way, so he set off over fields and mountains. But as he went, he would stop in little villages and help people. And they were very kind to him. They would give him lots of food and big mugs of ale. And he would do this every day. He would go to a different village. And you know what? It was like a big adventure. And Big He had never had adventures as a boy. He had to work very hard on his father's farm. And he began to really like these adventures and this change of village every day. And he thought to himself, you know what? This lifestyle suits me much better. I think I want to do a lot more of this. I don't want to be clearing the same field every day and digging with my hands. I want to go to a different village every day where people like me and give me food and give me big mugs of ale. Big She will be fine at home. She has everything she needs. She'll be grand while I'm away. And he decided to keep on adventuring. But you know what? Big She wasn't grand at home. Every day she'd look out the window, expecting to see her big husband come bounding up the little boreen. And he didn't. And she worried, and she had to do all the things at home by herself, remember? And days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and he still wasn't there. And she was so worried. What if he'd been injured in the battle? She'd no mobile phones back in those days. She didn't know. Or what if something worse had happened? Well, one day a merchant came into the village and he spotted Big She, and of course he went over to make conversation with her. Well now, missus, he said, you're the second giant that I've met this year. Fancy that, how unusual. Big She felt her heart leap in her chest. The second giant. Maybe the other giant was Big He, so she immediately started pressing the merchant for answers. Oh, what did he look like? This other giant, she said. Well, said the merchant, he was kind of big. Oh, Big She rolled her eyes. Big, big. Sure, we're all big. Aren't we giants? Give me some more information. Tell me what he looked like, his clothes, his appearance. Oh, well, long dark hair. Yes. Green eyes. Yes. Red boots. Yes. Oh, was there anything else? Oh, yes. He had a little board on a patch on his pocket. Yes. Yes, it was Big He. Before he left for battle, Big She had embroidered a tiny little blackbird on the jacket of his pocket to remind him to come back to Frenchfort, to remind him to come home. Big He was alive! She was so happy. She kept asking the merchants more questions. Well, was he injured? No. Did he bang his head? No. He must have lost his memory. Surely that's the only reason he hasn't come home to me. And the merchant felt sorry for Big She, and he had to tell her the truth. He had to tell her about the night that he met Big He in an alehouse with a big mug of ale, and Big He was bragging about his new life with all these adventures and how much fun it was. And he never once mentioned Frenchfort, and he never once mentioned his wife, Big She. Big She worried all this time, and now she could feel the sadness in her heart. And she thought about Big He. Why didn't he not come back to me? And the more she thought, the more sad she got, and tears started to come down her face. Now, I should remind you at this point that Big She is a giant. And when giants cry, they have teardrops that would fill a whole bucket. And the more she thought of Big He, are not coming back, the more she began to cry, and the more these big buckets of tears came down. They turned into rivers, and the rivers flowed down onto the ground, and the water began to rise. The more she thought, the more she cried. The more she thought, the more she cried. And the merchant and all the villagers jumped into the trees to stop themselves from drowning. And she cried and cried and cried so much that the birds in the hedges stopped singing, that her sadness was so great. Just when everybody thought she would flood the entire village, didn't Big She take off her golden wedding ring with anger, and she flung it to the ground so hard that it made a giant hole, and all the tears went into the hole like a whirlpool. When she'd finished crying, all that was left was a giant well filled with deep, salty tears. Now, meanwhile, the same day, far across the lands, Big He woke up to a yawn with a sore head and cold feet, sleeping on his jacket in a barn. Now, he often woke up with a sore head and cold feet, sleeping on a jacket in a barn, because sometimes adventures are not all they're cracked up to be. There's fun, and then there's the not so fun part. And he rolled over onto his jacket, and he looked, and he saw the little bird embroidered on the pocket, and he felt a big sadness in his heart. Oh, he thought, what a fool I have been. I miss Big She. Oh, I've been so selfish. I must go home to her at once. For what good are these adventures if she's not here by my side? And he set off across mountains and woods and lakes and rivers, and he headed off back to Frenchfort. And when he arrived, he walked down that little boreen, and he noticed that the birds weren't singing anymore. And he knocked on the door, and Big She opened the door and looked at him, and this time it was Big He that burst into tears. Oh, my love, he said, I've been such a fool. What use is an adventure without you by my side? I'm so sorry. Will you please forgive me? But Big She was still very angry and very upset, and she slammed the door in Big He's face. And that night, Big He had to go and sleep in the big little shed with the animals. And actually, for many more nights, Big He had to go and sleep in the big little shed with all the animals. But every morning he got up and he would collect hundreds of flowers and leave them at the door for her. And he would make her a huge bowl of porridge with honey. I hope you like porridge with honey. And he would leave it at the door for her. And he would write her dozens of little poems that talked all about how lovely she was and how silly he was and how sorry he was. Finally, after about a month, Big She opened the door and spoke to her husband. Husband, she said, I think it's time that I go on an adventure. Big He's face dropped. He was so sad and he bowed his head. You're leaving me, wife? I suppose I deserve that now for being so selfish. But Big She leaned into him and gave him a big little wink and said, well, I suppose you can come along with me, just as long as you keep doing the porridge and the poems and the flowers at breakfast. Big He and Big She gave each other the biggest hug that Frenchfort had ever seen. And at that moment, all the birds in the hedges began to sing so sweetly and so loudly. The next morning, Big He and Big She were packed and they were about to set off. They were going to have adventures and help people all across the land, but this time they were going to do it together. They gave the neighbours the keys to the house to look after the animals, and they were just about to walk down the boreen when Big He looked over and noticed the well. "What about your wedding ring, Big She?" he said. "Do you know what?" she said. "I think I'll leave it. It only reminds me of sad things. Besides, you can buy me an even nicer one when we're off on the road." And off they went, leaving Frenchfort, never to return again. But if you go to Frenchfort now and you walk down that little boreen, at the very end you will find the well. It's hidden in behind some bushes, and the locals will tell you lots of things about the well. They'll tell you that if you drink from the well on a day that it's quiet, the water will taste very salty and a great sadness will come over you. But if you take a drink on the day when the birds are singing loudly, the water will taste so sweet and your years will be full of happiness and adventures. And that's my story. Thank you for listening. Wow, I wonder if anyone out there likes giants. Hopefully you like giants. I love giants. I want to show you a picture that my friend Gala drew because this story is in one of my books. And I don't know if the picture in your mind was like the picture in Gala's mind when she drew it. So there is a picture of Big She when she's crying and she's a little cat on her head. That's my friend Gala drew that. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to go straight over to John, who might have another story for us. John.
I have. Can someone open my video? Would be brilliant.
Video
Fantastic.
fair.
Love that story. I need host to start my video.
They're working on it, John. I think there's a little frozen moment.
I think we're getting there. I'm there. Fantastic. Right. I thought as we're short on time, I'd do a story poem, and it's about monsters. And it's lovely of being at the Moth and Butterfly. I was going to start a story with moths and butterflies and all that, but I'm going straight into this poem. Me and my friend Joey thought just for a change that we'd go monster hunting on the monstrous mountain range. Joey said we'll need supplies, that's what I think. So we packed some peanut butter sandwiches. Now, I know there's some of you out there who don't like peanut butter. Now, I might ask you to put in the chat what you want, but I'll just guess what some of you would like. Would some of you like strawberry jam sandwiches? Or would some of you like cheese sandwiches? Or hummus? Or ham? Or tomato? We'll put all that in. So we packed some peanut butter, jam, cheese, ham, and hummus sandwiches and cans of fizzy drink. Well, Joey had a BMX and I had a mountain bike. We went as far as we could on those, then we had to hike. We'd not gone far up the mountain when Joey called, "Look over there. It's the barbless, razorless monster. The one that's all covered in hair." Well, we went a few steps closer. The monster let out a roar. Can I have a roar from all of you? If you can unmute and roar, that'd be great. 1, 2, 3. Roar. Now, a bit louder than that. 1, 2, 3. Roar. What? Last time, there's a rule of 3. I used to be a ringmaster in a circus, and there's always a rule of 3. 1, 2, 3. Roar. You can't scare us, said Snowy. That stuff doesn't work anymore. Then the excessively hairy monster with the enormous hairy head called us over to a rock, and this is what she said: "If you've come monster hunting, Then I'll put up a fight, I'll gnash my teeth and throw some stones and roar with all my might. But I suspect that's not your wish, that you only want to know if monsters really do exist, and how tall do they grow, and are there many different sorts, and where they all live, where there's answers to your questions that I'm prepared to give. Well, I won't keep you long. Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Now I've been doing this poem for 1,000 years, and there's answers to your questions that I'm prepared to give, providing that you promise me you come with good intentions. After all, we've been around for quite some time without without your intervention. No problem, answers Joey. That is understood. Now, why don't you tell all your friends we're really very good, and we don't want to upset them or ruin their routine, but having come all this way from monsters to stay, you're the only one we've seen. Now the excessively hairy monster put a finger each side of its teeth and let out one ear-piercing whistle that made the greyhound tremble beneath me and my friend Joey, so much that even she looked perturbed as frightened. And then from each side of the mountain came the loudest noise we'd ever heard, and they came with a rumble and tumble, and they came with a squelch and a crunch, and they came with a huffing and puffing, and they came with a gobble and munch, and some of them had 6 heads, and some of them only had 2, and some of them were purple, and some were pink and blue, and some had hair on the palm of their hands, and one had hair on its nose, and one was as bald as the day it was born, and one of them seemed to glow, and when they came up to the rock, the hairiest of them all, they were more than a little curious as to why on earth she called so many of the mountains monsters in the middle of the working day, and what could be the kind of game she'd invite them all to play. I won't keep you long, she whispered, but I've a sight that's really worth seeing. You might not have seen them round these parts before, but this is a human being. And there is another. Though they're not fully grown, I think they're wondrously strange, and by far the most curious creatures to be found on this mountain range. Then Joey pulled out her sandwiches and offered them around. Without any fuss, the monsters and us sat down upon the ground, and we had to agree as we munched at our lunch. Although mountains have their attractions, we had best cycle home, leaving monsters alone, trying to work out our human reactions. Whoa. Thank you for that. That what comes of changing minds about what I was going to do, but that's what we all do. I know Orla is the queen of improvisation, so thank you for that. And you, back to you, Orla.
Thank you so much. Apparently, I was on radio there for a while. I didn't realize that was completely frozen. That's what happens when you talk about giants. And John, that poem was lovely. I am so glad. The universe wanted you to tell that poem today. So there you are. That's what was meant to happen. Sorry, everyone. This is what happens on Zoom when you're in many different countries, and we're co-hosting today with the lovely World Storytelling Cafe. So I think I might have been doing radio storytelling for my story, apparently. But I was happy. I was telling. I didn't know it all. I would love Hannah to tell. I know we're right at time, so if people have to go, that's fine. But I would love if Hannah could tell another little short story. I would be so delighted. And if anybody wants to stay on, we want to listen. So, Hannah, have you got a little story for us?
I have. I've got a very little story for you. And because this is the Moth and Butterfly Festival, I thought I would end with this story because I love butterflies and I love moths. And this is a very tiny story about butterflies. Once, long ago, before I could remember, or you could remember, or indeed many of us could remember, there weren't any butterflies in the world. In fact, there weren't many creatures in the world. The world was very new. There were beautiful trees and beautiful flowers and beautiful streams and seas, and there were humans too. And whilst the humans, they really liked the trees and the flowers and the beautiful cool streams, they never seemed completely happy. And so up in the sky spirit looked down and he thought to himself, how can I make these new people happy? I've given them sunshine, I've given them trees, I've given them flowers, I've given them a sweet breeze, and yet they still hold frowns upon their faces, and they seem to worry about inconsequential places. I just want them to be happy. Well, he then suddenly came up with an idea that came from watching one of the small humans, the small people, the children. For there below he saw a girl and her brother, and they were picking his sweet flowers that he had given them, and they were throwing the petals up into the breeze and watching them float down. And they didn't have frowns upon their faces or lines. No, they seemed happy. And yet when he looked at the parents, they still had their frowns and their worries. And that's when he got the idea. And so the next time that little boy and girl took a flower and threw the petal up into the air, he blew his soft breeze, his magic breeze, and he transformed those petals. He transformed them into a little creature, and the petals became its wings. And then that creature flew and landed upon the little girl's hand, and then another on the boy's. And the children were delighted. And they forgot all about picking flowers and pulling off the petals. Instead, they watched these new creatures with wings as soft as petals, all the colours of the flowers around them fly. And then those two little creatures flew to their parents and landed on their shoulders, and all at once those parents' frowns and their wrinkles and their lines just disappeared as they watched in wonder of these new creatures flying all around. For you see, he had created the first butterflies. And if, like those children and those parents, and like me, when you see a butterfly, I'm pretty sure it will make you happy too. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much. I think I'm still invisible. I'm still invisible, but that's fine.
You're
Anna, that
beautiful,
was
Sky.
lovely. That was lovely. I loved it. It was a butterfly story. And your background is so beautiful. Balloons and butterflies and everything. I really loved it. I want to thank Hannah for telling lovely stories. I want to thank John for telling lovely stories. And I want to thank Ali and Nicole, the tech fairies in the background, who are juggling with the gods of the internet as we speak, from Morocco and Galway and everywhere. And most of all, I want to thank everyone who came today and is listening to us. And if you're listening in the future, I'm going to thank you in the future. So I would like to thank all the people from all around the world who tuned in, and the people in their forts, and the people on their sitting rooms, and the people who are jumping around their living rooms. I think there was a few of them, and the people who were sucking the sea up and all of that stuff. And for grown-ups, I'll put a little link in the chat right now, and you could go to the World Storytelling Cafe, or you can go to Moth and Butterfly Stories, and you can tune into all of those. And we have a whole weekend of festival left for the grown-ups, and the World Storytelling Cafe is on all the time. And check out Hannah and check out John individually as well, because they are wonderful storytellers. So from all of us here, we'll say Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you all for listening.
Thank
Bye, thank
you.
you.
Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. There's Brownsgrove. Hello, Brownsgrove. Hello. Hi, Ziza and Abigail. Hi, Abigail. Hi. Who's that with you there? Is that your auntie? Hello. Great. Brilliant. The couple of people hanging out. That's great. You can turn on your cameras if you like. I don't mind. If you're being shy, that's all right. Thanks so much. I'm going to put my glasses on. Hiya, Gary. Hi, Sheila. Simon, my phone, they're tuning in all by yourself, does he?
Hi, all. Can't switch
Brilliant.
on the camera.
Hello. Hello. That's brilliant. Okay, we're going to say goodbye to everyone now. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope to see some of the grown-ups later. Hi, Abigail. Wow. You got so big. Hello. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.